Good morning, friends. Welcome to another session of reading the writings of Shoghi Effendi. I hope you're getting some useful information out of this. I find that facilitating it, I'm having to look at it very carefully. And the more I look at it, the more it expands before my vision and get so excited about how the guardian is leading us. He's guiding our understanding. He's stimulating our thinking. He's inspiring our meditation on his breakdown of the first Bahai century. You know, he's written this. All of this information is coming from the foreword of God Passes By, and I think probably many of us have had the experience that when you go to a book, you kind of oftentimes skip over the introduction and the foreword. Not that that's a good idea, but it does happen. And maybe we never get back to it. But in the case of Shoghi Effendi's foreword, it's this terrific overview of the first Bahai century. And it enables us to create a grid, a mental grid, of where to hang all the details and facts that come up in the subsequent chapters of God Passes By proper. So for me, the foreword is a very precious gift from Shoghi Effendi. It's a reading of the whole first Bahai century. And you recall, the previous session, we discussed this and we went through the periods, the 4 periods of this first Bahai century. Briefly identified the first period is 1844 to 1853. And it centers around the gentle, the youthful, irresistible person of the Bab. The second period, 1853 to 1892, derives its inspiration from the august figure of Baha'u'llah. The third period revolves, that's 1892 to 1921, revolves around the vibrant personality of Abdul-Baha. And the fourth period, 1921 to 1944, when Shoghi Effendi penned God Passes By, is motivated by the forces radiating from the will and testament of Abdul-Baha. That's a very interesting definition. Motivated by the forces radiating from the will and testament of Abdul-Baha. So that was just to remind us of what these 4 periods are. And now we're going to go and examine some of the details that Shoghi Effendi is pointing out to us. Yep. Okay, now there's 4 periods. This is document number 17, I think, from the ones that we've advanced to look at. And I've inserted here a breakdown, which is my own invention, so you can do it differently if you read it differently. This is paragraph 8, and then after that it skips to 10 of the list if you number the paragraphs from the beginning to the end of the foreword. But this is just to remind us how he introduces the subject. So he tells us that the century under review, he's just been talking about what his plan is for the book, how he wants to set forth certain developments that have taken place during the first Bahai century. And he places them before us in the narrative of the book as which are the most outstanding, and then the secondary and the tertiary events that have taken place in each of the 4 periods. So he starts that, then he identifies, after this, he identifies these 4 periods, which we just summarily looked at, the first, the second, third, and fourth periods. But previous to that breakdown that we looked at of the central figures, and then these 4 specific periods. In this paragraph 8, he begins to guide, again, he guides our understanding. He stimulates our thinking with respect to these 4. So we want to fix these in our mind. It's a very easy way to be able to repeat Baha'i history. When Shoghi Effendi says we have to deepen ourselves in the history of the cause and in its essential verities. So knowing the history of the cause, really, basically, this is the book that gives it to you. I mean, obviously we have the dawn breakers that the Guardian has given us to help to establish the position of the Bab in our minds and our hearts. But here we have the breakdown of these 4 periods. Now notice here in this summary, he says the century under our review may therefore be considered as falling into 4 distinct periods. These periods are of unequal duration. Do you remember how long each one is? You want to go look back and see that? Each has a specific import. And each is of tremendous and indeed unappraisable significance. Each one in its own right has special value and qualities. Then he tells us more specifically that these 4 periods are closely interrelated and that actually they constitute successive acts of one indivisible, stupendous, and sublime drama. And he takes up this question of the drama and the major characters and the theater of the century itself from the first chapter of God Passes By, where he talks about it being the declaration of the Bab being the first act of this drama. Then he says about these 4 periods and this sublime drama whose mystery no intellect can fathom. Much as we might try, we can't quite penetrate it all. And whose climax no eye can even dimly perceive. The promises of this day of God, the promises of the eventual birth of a divine civilization. And the conclusion of this stupendous drama, no mind can adequately foreshadow. We saw that when we read 2 weeks ago about the shadow that Baha'u'llah casts over future manifestations of God, which will appear within his cycle, the Baha'i cycle, 500,000 years of it. Now look, he goes on and he says, each of these acts, these 4 acts of this drama, these 4 periods, revolves it around its own theme, boasts of its own heroes, registers its own tragedies, and records its own triumphs, and contributes its own share to the execution of one common immutable purpose. I really want to understand that, and the reading of God Passes By, the chapters of God Passes By go into the details of all these points. So again, the forward is preparing us for what we're going to see as the book explodes and opens before our eyes. Now he issues a warning here. He tells us to isolate any one of them, of the 4, from the others, to dissociate the latter manifestations of one universal, all-embracing revelation from the pristine purpose that animated it in its earliest days would be tantamount to a mutilation of the structure on which it rests and to a lamentable perversion of its truth and of its history. So we don't want to separate any of these from what the faith actually is in its present day. To this magnificent picture that Shoghi Effendi presents to us, the House of Justice has added aspects of a new culture. And particularly, this is more detailed at the local level of the work of the cause, which hadn't been completely sketched out. But now we have these various activities of a more complete approach to community. And recently, you'll recall, Laos of Justice particularly stressing the core activity of devotional meetings, because they attract the people. Of course, they are charged with the powers of the original revelation, because we're reading prayers and bringing those holy texts to the attention of the people who attend the devotional gatherings. Oftentimes leads to questioning and the development of further interest in the history of the cause and its meaning, and leads to inviting people to other core activities, including the study circle books. So this is all, that's the preliminary paragraph 8. Now I move on to paragraph 10 of the foreword. So again, he's repeating, after he sets out the content of the 4 periods in paragraph 9, he says, these 4 periods are to be regarded not only as the component, the inseparable parts of one stupendous whole, but as progressive stages in a single evolutionary process. Vast, steady, and irresistible. This is going forwards, friends. It has the whole force of the revelation of twin manifestations of God behind it. For as we survey the entire range which the operation of a century-old faith has unfolded before us, we cannot escape the conclusion that from whatever angle we view this colossal scene, the events associated with these periods present to us unmistakable evidences, and again, this is broken down, so we kind of concentrate on each of the points, of a slowly maturing process, of an orderly development, of internal consolidation, of external expansion of the cause, of a gradual emancipation from the fetters of religious orthodoxy, and a corresponding diminution of civil disabilities and restrictions. In other words, the recognition by different authorities of the correctness and rights of the Baha'is. He starts then to elaborate how, looking at Baha'i history, looking at these 4 periods as one entity, we witness a chain of events. He comes at this from so many different angles. Here he's talking about the chain of events proclaiming successively the rise of a forerunner, the mission of one whose advent that forerunner had promised, the establishment of a covenant generated through the direct authority of the promised one himself, and lastly, the birth of a system which is the child sprung from both the author of the covenant and its appointed center. Driving home a point that Shoghi Effendi made also verbally many times with the pilgrims, that the administrative order of the cause, Baha'u'llah is its father and Abdul Baha its mother. And in the mind of Abdul Baha is where the elaboration of things that were not specifically set forth in the Akdas and by Baha'u'llah himself come forth into the will and testament of Abdul Baha, which, as we saw, was the document from the forces of which the whole administrative order is generated. And this is interesting, friends, look at this. We note the chain of events and we observe, we watch. Just look at these, he's leading us along. He's really showing us the way here. We observe how the Bab the forerunner, announced the impending inception of a divinely conceived order. How Baha'u'llah, the Promised One, formulated its laws and ordinances. And how Abdul-Baha, the appointed center, delineated its features. And how the present generation of their followers have commenced to erect the framework of its institutions. Several things to take note of here. We want to identify the Bab with announcing the coming order of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah, who, as the Promised One, who has formulated its laws and ordinances, and Abdul-Baha, as it's the center of this covenant that was created, delineated its features. And how the present generation of their followers have commenced to erect the framework of its institutions. In his unique manner, Shoghi Effendi doesn't introduce himself into this. And yet he was the one who was directing us to erect the framework of its institutions and guiding every step we took. So it's for us to recognize that, and it was for him to pass the recognition of what's going on to the present generation of the followers of the three central figures. We'd ask the pilgrims, what succeeds the three central figures of the faith? And they would say, oh, Shoghi Effendi, or they'd say the guardianship, or they'd say the House of Justice. And Shoghi Effendi would say the administrative order. And it's the combination of the guardianship on the one hand and the Universal House of Justice on the other. Moving along with his description, we watch, he says, through these four periods, the infant light of the faith diffuse itself from its cradle, that is from Persia, Iran, eastward to India and the Far East, then westward to the neighboring territories of Iraq, of Turkey, of Russia, and of Egypt, all this during Baha'u'llah's ministry. Then that same infant light travels as far as the North American continent, illuminates subsequently the major countries of Europe, envelops with its radiance at a later stage the Antipodes meaning Australia and New Zealand and countries of this southern hemisphere on that side of the world, brighten the fringes of the Arctic. As far as I understand, this is referring to the arrival of pioneers in the far south of Chile, in Punta Arenas. And finally, then, during that same subsequent period, that infant light of the faith has set aglow the Central and South American horizons as part of the first 7-year plan that was launched in 1937 and continued until 1944. How do we do this? Let's see. Share screen. Can you see me now? I don't know.
Yes.
Can you see me, friends? I don't know. Let's see. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I see some nodding heads occasionally. This question of the light of the faith, the twin revelations have infused during the heroic age of the faith, during the first periods, the ministry of the Bab and the ministry of Baha'u'llah. These two divine revelators, manifestations of God, have infused the energies of this new revelation into the life of mankind, into the world, released it into the world. But it remained for it to be propagated, or as Shoghi Effendi has as he is called one of it, the infusion of that light. He's called this the diffusion of the divine light. Through the efforts of Abdul Baha and the period that of the divine plan which he released, gradually these lights were then diffused over the whole face of the planet. And he talks about, Shoghi Effendi has referred to another stage in this is the eventual suffusion of this light of the faith into the life of society. This is if the divine light went across the horizons and reached through the initial activities of the blessed pioneer workers, travel teachers of the cause during his own lifetime, during the time of both the master and then Shoghi Effendi. The faith, the light of the faith, through the fulfillment of the requisites of the divine plan, reached the whole planet. You remember the last place was different parts of the Eastern Soviet Union at that time. So then he says, what will happen this light will have to penetrate the societies that the lights covered the society through the arrival of those pioneers, but now through the workers of the cause, through the stages of the divine plan that the House of Justice is directing us in, this light, this infant light, has to penetrate into the life of society. And they focused us on local communities in the inception of this process. Okay, back to all right, now looking back again at this breakdown of the notes that we have in the forward, we watch again. We see, and all the other things that he calls us to do here. Survey, we note, we watch, we witness, so on. You can identify all those in your own paper copies of these. So we have the faith, the light of the faith, infused, diffused, and now beginning the process of suffusion, which will eventually lead to the transformation of human society. The energies of the faith haven't disappeared. It's just activating them, using them, drawing on them. Shoghi Effendi used to say that the divine confirmations are backed up in the heavenly realms, waiting to be released into the world, but it requires workers. So he encouraged the Baha'is to arise and teach the cause, diffuse the cause, fulfill the plans, and that energy will come to them as they act, if they act sincerely and with devotion. All those divine confirmations will be released and overwhelm them. He says, let the doubter arise and try it out. You'll see how it will be reinforced with these marvelous promised divine confirmations of the cause. Now he draws our attention to what's happening. I mean, look, friends, the Baha'is came from, it didn't come from nowhere. They didn't come without religion. They had backgrounds, they had cultures. We witness a corresponding increase in the diversity of the elements within its fellowship, which from being confined in the first period of its history to an obscure body of followers, chiefly recruited from the ranks of the masses in Shia Persia, it's expanded into a fraternity representative of the leading religious systems of the world, of almost every caste and color, from the humblest worker and peasant to royalty itself. This is an amazing, I mean, it's catapulted into a world religion Exceptional. Then he draws our attention. He says, we notice, okay, here we go again. We notice a similar development in the extent of its literature. A literature which restricted at first to the narrow range of hurriedly transcribed, often corrupted, secretly circulated manuscripts, so furtively perused, so frequently effaced, and at times even eaten by the terrorized members of a proscribed sect. This is the whole Babi period, such difficulties that the early Babis and Baha'is faced. But that's moved on, and this development in literature has, within the space of a century, swelled into innumerable editions, comprising tens of thousands of printed volumes in diverse scripts and in no less than 40 languages. I think that, you know, the ethnic groups and tribes, I don't know the current count on them. You can find those in the Baha'i World books generally. But I know that the languages into which the literature of the faith has been translated are over 800. Some of these volumes elaborately reproduced, others profusely illustrated, all methodically and vigorously disseminated through the agency of worldwide, properly constituted and specially organized committees and assemblies. The whole publication of the central writings of the faith is under the direction of Baha'i institutions of the administrative order. Next, and again, we have one of these phrases, we perceive, do we? Let's perceive a no less apparent evolution in the scope of its teachings, of the Baha'i teachings, which at first were designedly rigid, complex, and severe. This reminds us of some of the laws that the Bab included in his bayan, very strong, severe laws and punishments, which he said were all subject to the acceptance of Baha'u'llah. None of them were to be acted on. They were there. They had the cause of stirring up the ulama and the masses of Persia. These teachings then were subsequently recast, expanded, and liberalized. Allah forbade holy war and raising the sword against enemies or attacking the cause. And this under the succeeding dispensation, this of course refers to Baha'u'llah's dispensation. He recast, expanded, and liberalized the teachings. Later, and this through an appointed interpreter, they were later expounded, reaffirmed, and amplified by Abdul Baha. And lastly, systematized and universally applied to both individuals and institutions. And this, of course, was the work of Shoghi Effendi himself. Systematization of the writings, organizing them, getting them published, establishing he himself had taken on the Kitab-i Aqdas and created a list of the laws and teachings of the faith in the Most Holy Book. He hadn't published it yet, but it was all but published. I've seen his manuscript of it. Only one thing was added by the House of Justice before publishing it in 1973. Then he draws our attention to another process, which is the character of the opposition that the faith has encountered. We can discover, can we? Should we? Obviously, yes. How can we discover a no less distinct gradation in the character of the opposition that the faith has had to encounter? An opposition at first kindled in the bosom of Shia Islam, where the Bab arose, which at a later stage gathered momentum with the banishment of Baha'u'llah to the domains of the Turkish Sultan and the consequent hostility of the more powerful Sunni hierarchy and its caliph, who was also this Turkish Sultan, and the head of the vast majority of the followers of Baha'u'llah. We know, you're aware, they're Shia followers of Islam and Sunni followers of Islam, but the Sunni followers are a vast majority. I think what's between 80 and 90% of the followers are of the Sunni branch, and the Shia is much smaller. But as guided by the writings of Baha'u'llah, the correct branch of Islam. And this was an opposition which now, through the rise of a divinely promised order in the Christian West, that's the initial institutions of the administrative order and its initial impact on civil and ecclesiastical institutions, bids fair to include among its supporters established governments and systems associated with the most ancient, the most deeply entrenched sacerdotal hierarchies in Christendom. Then he draws our attention to, again, another process that's going on. We can, and we've talked about this previously, the 7 stages in the development of national communities. Here he's applying it at a world level. He says, we can at the same time recognize through the haze of an ever widening hostility, the progress, painful yet persistent, of certain communities within its pale. And these are the stages which Baha'i communities pass through. Obscurity, first nobody knows what it is. As it becomes known, then it becomes persecuted, proscription, limited, denounced. Eventually, as its teachings become understood and more widely recognized, some of the communities reach a stage of emancipation, and he gives some examples of that. You can find the details of this in the last quarter of God Passes By. Finally, of recognition, this is what we saw in the later list, that he identified these stages as the Baha'i state must needs culminate in the course of succeeding centuries in the establishment of the faith and the founding in the plenitude of its power and authority of world-embracing Baha'i Commonwealth, where a conglomeration worldwide of Baha'i states will be called upon by the House of Justice to establish a Commonwealth. Now he tells us that we can likewise discern a no less appreciable advance in the rise of its institutions, whether as administrative centers or places of worship. Institutions clandestine and subterranean in their earliest beginning, emerging imperceptibly into the broad daylight of public recognition, legally protected, enriched by pious endowments, and Shoghi Effendi introduced all these stages in the World Crusade, ennobled at first by the erection of a Mashal Askar in Ashgabat, the first Baha'i house of worship in the world, and more recently immortalized through the rise in the heart of the North American continent of the Mother Temple of the West, which he's defined as the forerunner of a divine, a slowly maturing civilization. An interesting side remark of The Guardian, he identified the Mother Temple of the West as not only a temple, but a holy place itself, because the master laid its cornerstone. It's unique in the Baha'i world, and therefore became the mother temple to the rest of the temples that will appear around the world. It was the mother temple of the West, but it gives birth, he says, to all the others. And finally, we can even bear witness to the marked improvement in the conditions surrounding the pilgrimage performed by its devoted adherents to its consecrated shrines at the world center. Now notice how he describes these pilgrimages. Originally arduous, perilous, tediously long, at least the coming and going, often made on foot, at times ending in disappointment. We all know the stories of the pilgrims who stood on the beach and they couldn't go in the prison and saw Baha'u'llah waving from the window of the prison. That became their pilgrimage. Confined to a handful of harassed Oriental followers, gradually attracting under steadily improving circumstances of security and comfort, an ever-swelling number of new converts converging from the four corners of the globe, and then culminating in the widely publicized yet sadly frustrated visit of a noble queen who at the very threshold of the city of her heart's desire was compelled, according to her own written testimony, to divert her steps and forego the privilege of so priceless a benefit. You can read the stories of this in the accounts here in God Passes By, and also then in some biographical accounts of the queens who had recognized the faith, who landed in Haifa, but under the compulsion of the authorities of her home country, was put into a limousine, a caravan that drove directly to Syria, to Damascus. And she missed the opportunity of meeting the guardian and together with him having tea with the greatest holy leaf and seeing the Bahai holy places. Sadly frustrated visit of a noble queen. This is where the forward ends. Whets our appetite on so many fronts. Let's see how I get you back again. It whets our appetite on so many fronts about what's coming in the book itself. And I hope that through our examining of these, you will become attracted to making a progressive study of God Passes By. It's a challenge. I think it's very interesting. I don't know, I suggest first a kind of overview, a reading of it all, but not trying to memorize every detail of it, move through the whole thing, then come back and go to the details in the same manner in which we have looked at Baha'i history through the forward to God Passes By. Actually look at the text of God Passes By. It's an immense work. The Guardian took 2 years of his life, of his service, to write this book. Ria Khanum said he liked to have someone with him in the room when he was writing, and he would write out loud. He would read what he was writing. And she says, because of that, it's all eminently readable. You can read it out loud, and it has this terrific power in itself. And maybe some of you will want to read it out loud or listen to it being read so that you can better absorb it. Pace the speed at which you're digesting its contents. It's a terrific gift to the world, a gift that's going to last centuries. All right, friends, now we're going to move to another document in your, if you want to look at your screen of documents there, where is that? Let's see. This is the class materials, okay.
Share screen. Share screen button. Green.
Okay, there you got,
No. Yeah, this one.
can you see that now, friends?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so looking down this list, the next thing we're going to look at from this is number 16, tributes by the leaders, various world leaders. And these were materials that Shoghi Effendi appended to the statement that we talked about earlier that he wrote after God Passes By, prior to the establishment of the State of Israel, which outlined the position of the Bahai faith in its relation to the coming into being of Israel itself. Now, that becomes quite significant as one of the activities of Shoghi Effendi. He assiduously collected these tributes and put them in a book.
Double click.
Put them in a book for the eventual publication. He had them published as they collected in Bahai World books, the Bahai World books that you know of as the large volumes, the earlier editions. And then he also published it in a separate book called Tributes to the Faith, which he edited himself. And this is very, very important to us. Now I want to find this here. All right, you see this on the screen now? Yes, okay. These are so encouraging, friends, and it gives us a vision of the cause in combination. Not all of it is everything, but different parts of it begin to give you some concept, some idea of how the world was viewing the cause. In this particular set of them that he's gathered for the document for the United Nations Committee, he begins with Queen Marie of Romania. It is like a wide embrace, is Queen Marie of Romania's own tribute, gathering together all those who have searched for words of hope. It accepts all great prophets gone before. It destroys no other creeds and leaves all doors open. The Baha'i teaching brings peace to the soul and hope to the heart. To those in search of assurance, the words of the Father are as a fountain in the desert after long wandering. It is a wondrous message that Baha'u'llah and his son Abdul-Baha have given us. They have not set it up aggressively, knowing that the germ of eternal truth which lies at its core cannot but take root and spread. It is Christ's message taken up anew in the same words almost, but adapted to the 1,000 years and more difference that lies between the year 1 and today. If ever the name of Baha'u'llah or Abdul-Baha comes to your attention, do not put their writings from you. Search out their books and let their glorious, peace-bringing, love-creating words and lessons sink into your hearts as they have into mine. Queen Marie she was not the queen of Romania, she was the queen mother. Her son was the king of Romania, and she was the queen mother. The teachings of the Babis, now quoting Leroy Tolstoy, or Leo Tolstoy, have a great future before them. I therefore sympathize with Babism with all my heart. That was what it was known to him in those days. inasmuch as it teaches people brotherhood and equality and sacrifice of material life for service to God. The teachings of the Babis, which come to us out of Islam, have through Baha'u'llah's teachings been gradually developed and now present us with the highest and purest form of religious teaching. That's an amazing statement by Tolstoy. We're told by the master that Tolstoy was preparing to write a book about the Baha'i faith when he passed away. He was trying to bring it to the attention of the world, but unfortunately his life didn't last long enough. Now, this is a response. These are responses to Martha Root's visit to these presidents, Masaryk and also Edward Benesch. Take these principles to the diplomats, is the late President Masaryk's advice, to the universities and colleges and other schools, and also write about them. It's the people who will bring the universal peace. The Baha'i teaching, is President Edward Benesch's testimony, is one of the great instruments for the final victory of the spirit and of humanity. The Baha'i cause is one of the great moral and social forces in all the world today. I'm more convinced than ever, with the increasing moral and political crisis in the world, we must have greater international coordination. Such a movement as the Baha'i cause, which paves the way for universal organization of peace, is necessary. And finally, a statement made by the Reverend T.K. Cheney, a very important religious writer and teacher at Oxford University. If there has been any prophet in recent times, asserts the Reverend T.K. Cheney in The Reconciliation of Races and Religions, it is to Baha'u'llah we must go. Character is the final judge. Baha'u'llah was a man of the highest class, that of prophets. And then he adds an additional note. It is possible indeed, declares Viscount Samuel of Carmel, to pick out points of fundamental agreement among all creeds. This is the essential purpose of the Baha'i religion, the foundation and growth of which is one of the most striking movements that have proceeded from the East in recent generations. Norman Bentwich, professor in England, Palestine may indeed be now regarded as the land not of three, but of four faiths, because the Baha'i Creed, which has its center of faith and pilgrimage in Akka and Haifa, is attaining to the character of a world religion. So far as its influence goes in the land, it is a fact making for international and interreligious understanding. And finally is the judgment passed by no less outstanding a figure than the late Master of Balliol College. This is Master of Balliol at Oxford University, Professor Benjamin Jowett. The Babi movement may not possibly turn out, the Babi movement may not impossibly turn out to have the promise of the future. Professor Lewis Campbell, an eminent pupil of Dr. Jowett, has confirmed this statement by quoting him as saying, "The Baha'i movement is the greatest light that has come into the world since the time of Jesus Christ. You must watch it and never let it out of your sight. It is too great and too near for this generation to comprehend. The future alone can reveal its import." All right, friends, let's see what you have, notes and questions over here. I'll go through your chat system here. This is it, all right.
Yep.
Or Jen, if you have any comments that you want to make about what we discussed, resolutions to get on with the study of God Passes By. Shoghi Effendi took it 2 years to read. I don't think it's going to take you that long to read it, but it does take a start. It's such a big book. Most of us never read anything so long in our lives. No more comments coming up. Okay. Well, friends, I think I'll leave you with that then for the time being. And we'll be back next week when we will begin a review of the essential verities of the Baha'i faith, the central underlying teachings of the cause. I look forward to see you next week. Thank you.